Great. Welcome everybody. It's a little bit after 12 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. So we're ready to get this webinar started. Hopefully my sound is coming through loud and clear. My name is Hillary Hayes and I work for Utah State University for the Center of Employment and Inclusion. My role here at Utah State University is to provide training and technical assistance to service providers who offer employment services to individuals with disabilities. And my position was made possible because Utah State University has partnered with the Department of Workforce Services, and with their funding and support, we're able to provide various trainings and webinars for you all as service providers. So a couple things before we get started. First and foremost, I'm just going to go over a couple things in regards to Zoom. Please, keep your microphone muted throughout this webinar and hold all questions until the end. If you do have any questions or comments throughout the training, please feel free to type them into the chat box, which you can view by pressing the chat button, which is located at the bottom of your screen, and we'll address them at the end of the webinar. Or at the end, you can unmute yourself and ask questions. Also in the chat box, I am going to upload a copy of a PDF form of the PowerPoint presentation for you all to download. And also, because this is, a grant-funded project, which is funded by the Department of Workforce Services, the Utah State Office of Rehabilitation, I'm required to collect data on what we do in regards to training in our webinars. So at the end of the webinar today, I'm going to post a link to an anonymous survey. Please take a couple of minutes after the webinar to complete the survey. These are great because they really do help us know what we need to improve upon in regards to training and what you all as service providers want us, to provide and host webinars in the future. Also at the end of today's webinar, I will upload a certification of completion. So everyone that's joined in today can download that. We also have another webinar coming up next month on October 6th, which will be on behavioral supports in the workplace. And I will also post a link to our website in the chat box as well. So if you'd like to attend that webinar or any future webinars, you'll be able to see those and register. And on our website, we have a ton of other previous webinars recorded. So you guys can view those. And this webinar will also be uploaded for you guys to view in the future. So now with all that said, I'm really excited to have Pamela Williamson here to present today's webinar on, reasonable accommodations, which is a topic I'm super passionate about. So Pamela is the Assistant Director of the Southeast ADA Center, a project of the Burton Blatt Institute at Syracuse University. She's also a member of the Georgia Association of People Supporting Employment First, APSE. And she's the board of directors. She's on the board of directors there. Pamela has a lot of expertise on the Americans with Disabilities Act, special education, and supported employment. So with that being said, I'm really excited to turn our time over to Pamela, and so we can learn a little bit more about reasonable accommodations and promoting a culture of diversity where every person belongs.
Thank you, Hillary. I appreciate the opportunity to share with all of you today. And give me just a moment as I share my screen. Okay, fantastic. Well, as Hillary said, today the title of the presentation is Beyond Reasonable Accommodations, Promoting a Culture of Diversity Where Everyone Belongs. And I know all of us who have worked in the employment field, and especially employment specialists, we, work with folks who have disabilities. We may understand the reasonable accommodation process, But the reality is that it's so much more than just a person getting a reasonable accommodation, because we really want to be able to promote that culture of diversity. And so a person can truly belong in the work environment and not just have a job where they have accommodations. So we're going to be talking about that today. And while I'm doing a little bit of the intro that I have to do, I would love for you to put in the chat area what state you live in, because I like to know who I'm talking to and where you live. As you can tell, and as Hillary stated earlier, I am the Assistant Director of the Southeast ADA Center. I am a Georgia girl, born, raised, and have lived here most of my life, except for a brief foray into Tennessee and South Carolina. But I have been with the center for over 20 years, and I am passionate about people with disabilities having equal employment opportunities and being included in the workplace. Now, so I do have to do my short disclaimer, because this presentation was partially developed with funding from the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, and it's a part of the Administration for Community Living at the Department of Health and Human Services. We are a grant-funded project, and the Southeast ADA Center receives funding in order to be able to do trainings like this and to do outreach to people and talk to them about their rights under the ADA. Now today we're going to talk about 5 different things. First of all, we're going to look at disability history and its impact on the workplace. And then we're actually going to discuss diversity and where we are in that area and how it's impacted the workplace. But we're also going to talk about the questions that we need to have to start the conversation with employers about disability as part of cultural diversity. And then we're going to outline the steps to include disability in the diversity discussion. And then last but not least, I'm going to leave you with resources that you can use to promote that inclusive culture. So we're going to launch a poll question now, and I want you to rate your knowledge of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So as very knowledgeable, moderately knowledgeable, slightly knowledgeable, and no knowledge at all. So Hillary, I think you're going to release. There we go. So go ahead and put in your information for me. Okay, it looks like most of you are kind of falling in the moderately knowledgeable and slightly knowledgeable area. And you know what? That's okay, because that means that you're here to learn more, and that means that we are going to learn together. So I'm really happy about that. And so today I want you to think of this as the opportunity to learn more, but I also want to encourage you, those of you that put very knowledgeable, to think about how you can mentor some of these other folks who may not be as far along in the process as you are. And for the one person who indicated no knowledge at all, I'm glad you're here, because to me that's one of the most exciting things we can have, is somebody who's ready to have new knowledge. All right. How many of you are familiar with the ADA National Network or your regional ADA center? And if you are, have you ever contacted your ADA center? Yes or no? Okay, looks like we've got about 71% of you saying you've never contacted your ADA center. Oh my goodness, we're getting ready to become best friends then, because I'm going to give you one of the resources you need to have in your toolbox. And for those of you that have the 29% or so that say you have contacted your ADA center, I'm thrilled to know that, because that means that you have found an excellent resource as you're serving the people with whom you work. So So let's dive in a little bit. And I see that we have people from Colorado and Utah, as well as Missouri, Virginia, let's see, Tennessee, that's from my area of the world. So South Dakota, Alaska, and California. So that's great. I'm glad you're here. So we're going to move on to our next slide. And I'm going to introduce you to the Southeast ADA Center and the ADA National Network. Now, I work for the Southeast ADA Center. Now, we're actually a project of the Burton Blatt Institute at Syracuse University. And so, but our regional office is located in Atlanta, Georgia, and we serve the 8 states in the Southeast region. Now, all of these regions are based upon the federal regions that are set up in the Department of Health and Human Services. And so we, in addition to serving those 8 states, we have a partner organization in each state. So we've talked about our funding, so I'm going to move on. But we are a member of a larger group called the ADA National Network. And now the ADA National Network, there are 9 other centers like mine across the country. And all we do is answer questions and provide training and public awareness about the Americans with Disabilities Act. If you take away nothing else from this presentation, I want you to make sure you have this toll-free number, 1-800-949-4232, and the website, adata.org, because once I leave today, and you may have more questions about the Americans with Disabilities Act, your regional center is going to be your point of contact. And for many of you that are from Utah and other places, you're served by the Rocky Mountain ADA Center, and we have people who answer the phones and talk with people about the questions they may have. Now, and later, after this presentation, I encourage you to download this fact sheet on the types of services that we can offer you, because we want to make sure that you know what we can do for you, because we're not an enforcement agency. So, you know, a lot of folks think that we are, but we are a place where you can get guidance on the Americans with Disabilities Act. So let's set the stage today and talk about where we're going. At first, I want to introduce you to my friend and colleague, Liz Weintraub. If you know Liz, you know she is a passionate advocate and also a person with a disability. She's also a senior advocacy specialist on the public policy team at the Association of University Centers on Disabilities. And she hosts a program each Tuesday called Tuesdays with Liz, Disability Policy for All. If you haven't listened to Liz, I highly encourage you to do it, because she brings a perspective and she is about everyone being included. With her permission, I have a quote that she posted to Facebook in December of 2019. And she says, how would you ensure that all is in capital letters, ALL, people, including people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, are included in all areas of life? And that includes education, work, living, playing, and being part of the conversation. I hope that someday someone will actually get to ask the question at the debate, and the debate she's referencing was a presidential debate, because we as people with disabilities are also citizens of the US and we matter. You know, when Liz posted that, I was so excited, and when I followed up with her to ask if I could use it in my presentation, she says, please do, because we all matter, and especially people with disabilities. And she says, and we get left out of the conversation too many times. So keep that in mind, because that's straight from someone who has received employment services in the past. So let's talk a little bit about disability history. My daddy used to say that, you know, if we don't understand our history, we're not going to understand where we can go in the future, because our history helps to provide a foundation, and sometimes it's a shaky foundation. So, but the long and the short of it is that we all come to the table with some biased assumptions or unconscious biases, things that are really shape our thinking about people, and especially people with disabilities. And oftentimes we also have harmful stereotypes that we think about, and this particularly happens in the area of psychiatric disabilities or people that have disabilities that we're not as familiar with, and then also some irrational fears. And people with disabilities have been historically isolated and segregated up until the 1980s. We had people in horrific conditions, and Burton Blatt Institute was actually named after Burton Blatt, who was a professor at Syracuse University, who in the 1960s went into some psychiatric hospitals and did undercover work with cameras and everything, showing the horrific conditions that people were living in. And unfortunately, we're still seeing this to the segregation to some extent today, but it's not as horrid as it once was. And so we really have to think about this, because we've still got laws on the books in our country that say that if a person has a physical disability, then they should not be on the streets. Now, I hope that we've come further than that, but the fact that these laws have not been removed from the books really does disturb me as a person with a disability, and the fact that we've made improvements, but they're still there. So we want to make sure things get better. Now, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, one of our first presidents that had a visible disability, said we must scrupulously guard the civil rights and civil liberties of all of our citizens, whatever their background. We must remember that any oppression, any injustice, any hatred is a wedge designed to attack our civilization. You know, this is where I think employment specialists are key to removing this oppression and injustice that may be in our workplaces, because you're the bridge. And we're going to talk more about that in a little bit. Now, before you, we have a list of several laws, starting in 1943 with the Vocational Rehabilitation Amendments, and going on to Social Security Amendments in 1956, and then the Civil Rights Act in 1964, on up through 1990, where we have the Americans with Disabilities Act, and then on into 2014 with the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. Now, these are multiple laws that have been passed over the years to protect the rights of people with disabilities, or to be able to promote employment of people with disabilities. And so we've got a long legislative history, but unfortunately, as you can see, it's taken all the way into the 2000s now, and for us to be able to really now start promoting the equal employment of people with disabilities. So as we look at this, just think about this rich history of legislation, but also now let's think about it in a way of how we make it more of a reality. We've mentioned the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and I'm going to bring it back to mind now because it was the original, one of the original laws that focused on disability. And at that time, it applied to businesses or organizations receiving federal funding. And many businesses or organizations receive federal funding in some form. And it was one of the first laws that required private businesses or employers to be accessible to and usable by people with disabilities. So it really established the foundation for what we now know as the Americans with Disabilities Act. Yet we still are seeing barriers. It was passed in 1973, so almost 50 years ago now. And there have been many research studies done and looking at how we identify the solutions. But the reality is people do continue to be excluded. Stereotypes continue, the limited opportunities are still available, and the physical barriers remain. Now, so we just celebrated the 21st anniversary of a case called Elsie versus Olmsted. So put in the chat area if you know, if you remember that case. Just say yes or no. And Hillary, I'm going to have you look in the chat area and kind of give me a gauge, because my cursor has decided it doesn't want to move.
So thus far, I've got one person that says kind of, the rest are a no.
Okay, so well, let me talk about this a little bit then, because so the Supreme Court actually had this case back made this decision back in 1999. Now this case happened in Georgia, my home state, and it was two ladies, Lois Curtis and Elaine Wilson. So, and they were individuals who had psychiatric and cognitive disabilities, who had been in institutions most of their life here in Georgia. And so they were and at this point they were living in nursing homes. And, and they were young. I mean, they were still, young adults at this point in time. And eventually, so Elaine was transferred to another place, and they were continually put into these restrictive environments. And yet they both wanted to live out in the community with supports, and the state of Georgia kept saying no. Now, this was in 1999, folks. So we've got these folks who want to live, these folks who want to, live out in the community, and are being told, no, you can't do it. You've been in the institutions too long. Well, the legal aid in the state of Georgia and in the Atlanta area took the case on, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. Then the Supreme Court said, you need to be able to provide support to these women and to any other person who wants to live out in the community. So that's where the movement towards home-based services and community-based services started. And this was in 1999. So now we're 21 years later, and both of these ladies did get to move out into the community. Yet, even here in our own state, we're still seeing people who are remaining in institutions because we don't have the capabilities, and nor have we put enough resources behind the idea of people living independently. So we want to make sure that we're part of the solution, and this is part of what we're going to be talking about today. Oops, hold on. There we go. Okay. So the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990. Now, it was a milestone legislation, and because it was the first law that covered both private employers, state and local government employers, public agencies were covered more fully than they were under the Rehab Act of 1973, and now you have private businesses that were covered. And it was the first law that actually guaranteed the civil rights of all citizens, and particularly citizens with disabilities. Now, Congress, in its findings, looked at several things: the census data, national polls, other studies. And one of the things that they noted was that people with disabilities had an inferior status in our society were severely disadvantaged socially, vocationally, economically, and educationally. So all of the areas that we tend to look at is the success areas of life, people with disabilities were found to be at a disadvantage. So Congress said, you know, we've got to look at this and we've got to make it our goal. And not only our goal, but our proper goals. I love that statement, proper goals, because it just means it's right. And this is the way we should go. And so so the ADA was passed to assure and ensure equal opportunity, full participation, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency. Now, when we think of the American dream and we think of the things that we like to do, these are the 4 things that we should be able to go after, no matter so if we have a disability or not. But as we move forward in looking at disability, we've really got to look at disability as part of a diversity mindset. And diversity is something that's become very, very important in our culture, as it should be. But disability really has really been kind of set aside as, well, we've got our diversity initiative, now let's think about disability. But I want us to look at a video that was done by John Kemp, who is the executive director of the Viscardi Center. And he is an individual that has a significant disability. So I'm going to stop sharing this, and we're going to look at the video momentarily. Well, folks, we tested this ahead of time and it worked, and now it's decided not to work. So I am going to sum up the video. I do encourage you to watch it later. So let's go back. Basically, so Mr. Kemp, John Kemp, basically says, you know, we've got to look at disability as part of diversity, no matter what. And that it cannot be an aside. It can't be something that we think about just here and there, and that it really has to be at the forefront and at the beginning of our thought process. Oh, just a moment. Okay, there we go. So, and that it also too, we've got to remember that that when we talk about people with disabilities, that, you know, we're talking about approximately 20% of our population. That is a huge part of our population. That 20% of people doing anything en masse can change the direction of whether it be at the polls, whether it be a boycott of a business that's not doing things accessibly. So we really have to think about this, and the fact that we as a community of people with disabilities have a voice. So at this point in time, I want you to type into the chat area what the word diversity means to you. I know you're thinking, but so think about the word diversity and type your response in the chat area. Okay, I'm seeing some things. Inclusion, acceptance, differences, uniqueness, individualized, I like that, choices, respecting all differences, everyone is welcome, people from a variety of backgrounds, experience, etc., that can all work together, a difference or a variation, Oh, differences in thought culture. Oh, I like that. Everyone is valued. Oh, by all means. Person-centered. Another, inclusion. Everyone is different. Man, y'all are great. So because I've done this before, I kind of had an idea of where you might go. So I mean, I admit I cheated a little bit and did my little graphic here, but we've got all kinds of thoughts about diversity. And you know, when we think about that, just look at the many things that it has. There's a few that were a little different than what you may have put into the chat area. Relationship building. So think about how stagnant we become if everybody's just like us. Diversity brings about relationship building. And the positive impact that it can have on a workplace or any other community. And my friend Liz says, all means all. So, and also the talent that it brings to the table. So we've got all kinds of things when we think about diversity. But now we're going to define diversity, and I use dictionary.com just because it's one of my favorites. But it's the state or fact of being diverse. Now, I was always taught you don't use the word to define a word. So we're going to go to the next part where it says it's a difference. But then we also have variety, the inclusion of individuals that represent more than one national origin, color, religion, socioeconomic stratum, sexual orientation, disability, etc. So, or a point of difference. Now, diversity in the workplace actually is one of the best things we can do. And as employment specialists, you're contributing to the idea of diversity in the workplace. And these are things I want you to remember as employment specialists, because these are things that you can use as talking points when you're talking to new employers that you may want to work with in the future. Because diversity in the workplace actually leads to better outcomes for your customers. People like to shop, like to frequent places where people look like them. So if the area in which you're working and is has employees who look like you and that are representative of the demographics of your area, then people are going to be more likely to do business with that particular company. It also creates a better working environment for employees all the way around, because if we you work with people from diverse cultures, then we get to learn more about each other. And that culture could be disability, it could be ethnicity, it could be sexual identity, it can be from many, many different areas. And it also increases the positive impacts on community. And that goes back to the idea of the fact of, when you represent the demographics of the people that you serve, then people are going to be more likely to frequent your business. Now, there's the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer of the company PwC, Mike Dillon, said if there are groups of talented people in our workplaces that are not empowered to speak out, then we all lose out. And I firmly believe that. And that's where I feel like it's our job to help people understand how to have a voice in the workplace. So let's talk about what happens when we exclude people with disabilities. Without diversity, we really do make our potential labor pool too small. Now, I understand that right now we have challenges in our country. The reality is that we've seen numbers in the unemployment arena that we have not seen in a long, long time. But at the same time, so there are places that are hiring and they're looking to diversify their workforce, and they want to be able to bring in people at all different levels from all different backgrounds. The other thing too is that when we don't have diversity, it really creates what we call groupthink, and it really just limits our ability to creatively problem solve. You know, when we talked about earlier, when we spend time with people who are just like us, we all think the same way, we drink the same way, we eat the same way, and then when it comes time to solve any problems, there's no new ideas to be had. And the neat thing is when we have people from diverse backgrounds, and especially when we're working with individuals with disabilities, and since I am a person with a disability, I feel like I can say this confidently. There are days I have to be more creative than others because I have to figure out a workaround for my disability so that I can get the job done. So I'm going to bring ideas to the table that someone who doesn't have my disability may not have because they have the same life experience. So also too, when we exclude people with disabilities from the workplace and remove them from the diversity conversation, it really depresses or it lowers their earnings. You know, and I know many of you are probably familiar with sub-minimum wage, and this has been one of the things that has happened because we have put people into areas where they are only people with disabilities are there, and they're getting paid less than minimum wage to do a job that other people may be getting paid minimum wage or more to do. And then we also too, honestly, when there's exclusion of any group, but particularly people with disabilities, there's trouble. And we don't want to bring trouble to our workforce. We want our workforce to be creative and vibrant. You know, we were talking about the statistics a little earlier, and these are the statistics from August with the unemployment rate and the labor force participation. Now, the unemployment rate, just as a point of clarification, is the number of people or percentage of people who are unemployed and want to work, or they're actively seeking work. So the unemployment rate for people with disabilities is currently hovering around 13.2%, but people without disabilities at 8.4%. Something that is interesting about this number, though, is that it hasn't risen as much for people with disabilities as the one for people without disabilities during the pandemic, and that's been interesting to watch, and so that. To me, that's encouraging because it means that people with disabilities are keeping their jobs, and they're not always being the first ones to be let go. Now, we're looking at, when you look at labor force participation, and these are people ages 16 and over who are working or who want to work. So for people with disabilities, it's 20.6%, but for people without disabilities, it's 67%. That is a huge gap, and that's a gap that we need to be able to fill in and to be able to show employers that we want people with disabilities to be able to join the workforce. Now, we've talked about some of this, and so I won't spend a lot of time here, but really and truly what it means for people with disabilities when they're excluded, they're either unemployed or underemployed. An example of that, I personally know a young man right now who has a disability, has a master's degree, and has been looking for a master's degree in political science and policy. He has been looking for a job for 2 years and still has not found one because of his disability. Very, very intelligent young man. So that means that number two's coming in to play here because he's unfairly perceived as a drain on society. And he's also being stigmatized because of his disability, because he's very vocal about his disability, and it's very obvious that he has a disability when he goes in for an interview. So that means that he's experiencing discrimination, not only in employment, but probably in other areas of his life too. So we talked about earlier something that I believe with every fiber of my being, that employment specialists are truly the bridge between an employee with a disability and the employer, because you are the folks that have the ability to have a foot in both worlds, and you are the ones that can talk to both sides. And to me, that is one of the most important things you can do, because as far as I'm concerned, without employment specialists that can help bridge that gap, so then we're losing quality people who need and want to work. And we're also denying employers the opportunity to learn more about what it means to have qualified people on staff and to increase the diversity in their workforce. So we're going to talk a little bit about the steps that it takes in order to be able to become more, to really to talk about with the employer or the business. You know, the first thing is that communication is always key. And then, because if we are not able to share our message in a way that's understood, then at the end of the day, it's really not going to matter, because we've got to be able to get to that employer. So we need to learn to speak business. So not employer, business, because when we talk about, because an employer is really, a business is concerned about their bottom line, staffing their, hiring employees who are qualified, or meeting a need. So we've got to be able to talk about business development versus job placement. Although your end goal may be to place this person in a job, the employer or the business wants to know how this is going to help them develop their business and make it better. And we've got to be able to talk about the person being qualified versus job ready. So, you know, job ready is a term that we use in our business, and every industry has them. I mean, my husband works in the insurance industry, and he'll start throwing out these terms, and I just glaze over. So we need to talk about, you know, the person's qualifications, highlight their strengths, and also too looking at, you know, how it's going to enhance the productivity at the business versus, you know, accommodation. Although the legal term is reasonable accommodation, it's really is, when you look at a reasonable accommodation, it's how a person can do the job, do it well, and increase their productivity so that it benefits the business or employer. We've also got to be able to understand the business customers' needs, and we want to view them as our customers, because when we walk in and say or start talking to businesses, we've got to find out what they need. And we need to look at them in a way of assessing their needs, and then understanding that they're going to make decisions based on their business's needs, not on a person's individual needs. And this really is kind of a mind shift for many folks, because if you're like me, you get into the mindset of I've got to do this. I want to make sure this person gets a job. But again, you're in the unique role of being the bridge. So you can take the same concepts and ideas and put them into thoughts about understanding what the business needs. Now, I often start out this slide, it says start the conversation. And as you heard earlier, I'm a good Southern girl. I'm from Georgia, and I love my sweet tea. But the other thing I love is sitting on the front porch with my sweet tea. You got to be able to talk to people. And unfortunately, in this day and age, we've often lost the art of conversation. And, I can learn so much more about someone by sitting down and having a chat with them. And although I may have, a checklist in my head of questions, of things I want to check off, we really do need to kind of get to the meat here of, who does disability include? Because we want to find out what the businesses or employers understand. Are they only familiar with people with physical disabilities? Do they have their own fears about hiring people with psychiatric disabilities or cognitive disabilities? So in their mind, who does it include? And then asking the question of what are they currently doing to promote disability as part of diversity in the workplace? And a lot of times I find that employers or businesses are already doing things, they just don't realize it. And it's because they may already have a very inclusive policy or a very generous leave plan that they have for that cuts across for all employees, and they've already got the concept, they just don't realize it. And then also too, talking to them about when do you include disability in the conversation? Is it just once a year when we're heading for October for National Disability Employment Awareness Month? Or you're celebrating something special like the ADA and, you want to, promote that? Or do they include this across the board in conversation throughout the year when they're making decisions? And then where do you include disability in the conversation? Is it just when there's a problem? Is it just when, or is it something that's thought about when new policies and procedures are being developed or revised? And we've also got to be able to talk about the why, because honestly, people who don't eat, breathe, and sleep this, they don't understand why it's important. We get to be the ones that bring that to the table into the conversation. And then we can also talk about how the culture can improve by including employees with disabilities. And that goes back to some of the things that we talked about earlier. So in taking the information about, what happens when we exclude people with disabilities, we can then talk about what it means if we include people with disabilities in the conversation. The other thing is that we've got to be able to adjust our services to meet the business customers' needs. I want to encourage you to view your role as a facilitator, because you're in that unique role where you can help a company become more disability inclusive. You can help them understand the value of including people with disabilities. You can also provide consultation on accommodations. And you know what? You may think you don't know that much, but you know what? The neat thing is you can get the questions, and you can call places like the ADA National Network, the Job Accommodation Network, other places that can help you think through potential accommodations. Call your colleagues, call Hillary, and think through these things, because because they may not have the time or the resources to be able to do this, but you can, and because you're going to know both the business and the employee with a disability. And then, of course, you can always provide job coaching or other on-site support services. And, at some point, I'm hoping that the employer or business will have embraced this to the point, so that you can help establish a disability-related employee resource group. Offer to help get that started so that they can have these conversations. The other thing is we want to be able to meet businesses or employers where they are, because people come from a variety of management styles and backgrounds. And the thing about it is, people are going to you typically fall into one of three areas. And this was actually, I love these names, but they were actually developed by a professor and our team of researchers at the University of Pennsylvania Wharton School of Business. And But the choir are your companies that already have existing programs that promote disability as part of diversity. They've got their act together. They're really working on the recruitment, the hiring, the retention. You know, that's great. And if they're doing that, then you can just slide in and just help them with keep going. And then you've also got companies that want a diverse workforce, but they really haven't included people with disabilities in the discussion. And this is a perfect place for you to be able to sit at the table and to help them think through how to do that. And then you've got the uninitiated. These are the folks that are clueless as a day is long, and they're not there. They haven't even thought about it, so they're not even at the table yet. So you're maybe the first person that can help introduce them to the concept. And part of the way you can do that is by asking the open-ended, non-judgmental questions, because you want to be able to understand where folks are coming from. And we all, as we talked about earlier, we all come to the table with those biases, whether we realize it or not. And folks, I'll tell you, I've worked in the disability field. I tell people that I have over 50 years of experience because I was born into a family of people with multiple disabilities. And I still had my own biases that I had to deal with. So so we've really got to be able to talk to folks and just find out, you know, what their experiences are, what they've been exposed to. But also too, in addition to that, it's important that we be able to have an active listening mode. You know, think through it. Just listen carefully. Listen to the undertones. What's being said that's not being said. And also to be patient. It's going to take time. These are, you know, some people are ready to go and they're part of the choir and they're good, but others who are uninitiated, they're not there yet, and it's probably going to take a while. But the other thing that you can do with this is that I encourage you to foster those ongoing partnerships, and they can be formal, where there's a signed agreement, a memorandum of understanding. So, but it can also be informal. And I personally believe that many of these relationships are better built on the informality than they are the formal, because this is where you meet each other at community meetings. You can talk about what's, you know, staffing needs. You can, they can, you know, ask them to share with you job opportunities, and you can, you know, you may be able to share with them about potential employees that can fill their need. But the other thing is establish yourself as a resource. You know, make it so that they feel comfortable calling you to ask questions about accommodations or disability related questions. And, you know, because if you establish yourself as a resource, if you don't know the answer, you know, the best thing you can do is say, you know, I'm not real sure about that, but I've got this great group I can call and I'll get back with you on that. And that really puts you into that wonderful position of being able to continue to facilitate the good things that are going on and really look at including disability as part of diversity. Now we've taken all of these steps and I've put them together into this nice little roadmap for you. And if you decide you just want to print one slide, I encourage you to print this one and kind of keep it at your fingertips, because this one will help you to remember that it is really just really thinking through the process of making sure you're establishing the communication and speaking business, looking at the business as a customer, having the conversation of that I call the 5 W's and the H, much like a journalism major. So, and adjusting your services into the one is the role of a facilitator. So meeting the employers where they are. So, and really embracing them no matter where they are. And also to looking at ways to, you know, foster and move forward that ongoing partnership. Now, I don't ever like to leave people without tools, and I'm not going to spend time on each of these slides, but I do encourage you to look at the resources that I've provided to you, because we have information on the ADA National Network, as well as other pieces of information from the U.S. Department of Labor and how to create inclusive workplaces. Now, at this point in time, I am more than happy to answer any questions you might have. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I would love to chat with you. Let's see, Hillary, it looks like our group might be small enough that well, let's do it. If you've got a question, let's put it in the chat area. That'll be the easiest thing to do. If you've got a question, put it in the chat area, and I'll be happy to do my best to answer them for you.
That was amazing, Pam. Seriously, I love how you went into talking with employers and working with them at the same time as your individual. I go into that in my training. I call it a dual customer approach. That's amazing. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.